The champagne flute slipped from my trembling fingers, crashing to the marble floor. Crystal shards scattered like fallen stars across the ballroom, each one catching the horror on my daughter's face. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Chloe's voice sliced through the polite chatter, cold and sharp as glass. She stood at the top of the staircase, a vision in white lace and arrogance. The dress, $12,000 of imported silk, shimmered under chandeliers that had cost me 3 months of profit to rent. Guests turned. Conversations died. Only the string quartet continued playing, unaware that a man's heart had just broken in the doorway. "I wanted to congratulate you, sweetheart." My voice came out smaller than I intended, half swallowed by the room's echo. "You weren't supposed to come." She exchanged a glance with Nathan, her new husband, whose smile carried the confidence of old money. "Mr. Bennett," he said smoothly, "I think there's been some misunderstanding." "What misunderstanding?" I asked. "This is a private family celebration." Chloe murmured, her cheeks tightening into a practiced smile. "Immediate family only." The words hit harder than any construction accident I'd ever survived. 30 years of bedtime stories, scraped knees, and late-night homework collapsed into one humiliating sentence. I looked around at the guests, men in tailored suits. Women in diamond bracelets, all staring at the old man with calloused hands and a cheap tie. "I paid for this wedding, Chloe," I said quietly. "Every flower, every plate, that dress you're wearing." Nathan's smile didn't move, but his jaw did. "Money doesn't buy class, sir." "You're right," I replied. "It doesn't." I set the small white gift box on a nearby table and turned toward the exit. Each step echoed through the silence until the heavy doors closed behind me. Outside, the cool Portland air hit my lungs like truth. Within 2 hours, her perfect wedding would collapse, not because of revenge, but because of justice. Harold Bennett had spent most of his life building homes for other people. He could still remember the first one he ever finished, a small 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of Portland, painted soft blue. He'd handed the keys to a young couple and thought, "Someday I'll build something that lasts longer than walls." He did. Her name was Chloe, when Laura, his wife, died of ovarian cancer. Chloe had just turned 3. Harold had no time to grieve between running his fledgling company and raising a child who woke up crying for her mother every night. His world shrank to sawdust, invoices, and bedtime stories. Every night he'd whisper, "Daddy's right here, sweetheart," and believe it would be enough. It was for a while. As the years passed, Bennett Builders grew from a one-man operation into a respected local firm. He never missed a school play, never skipped a recital, even when deadlines loomed. His calloused hands looked ridiculous holding bouquets of roses in polished auditoriums, but Chloe would beam when she saw him in the front row. By the time she reached high school, Harold's reputation as a blue-collar success story had made him a local legend. But in private, he never bragged. He was simply a man trying to replace a mother's love with effort. Then came college applications. Chloe dreamed big: Stanford, then Berkeley, eventually settling on a private university in California with a tuition bill that could have bought him another house. He didn't hesitate. He sold one of his investment properties, cashed in his retirement bonds, and said, "Education first, comfort later." At first, she called every week. "Dad, you won't believe it. I made Dean's List." He'd beam through the phone, feeling that all the overtime hours were worth it. Then the calls changed. "Dad, I need $3,000 for a class trip." "Dad, my car broke down again. It's urgent." "Dad, the rent's gone up. I'll pay you back soon, I promise." She never did. Still, he told himself it was normal. Kids grow. They drift. Gratitude would come back someday, maybe when she had children of her own. Then Chloe met Nathan Pierce, the son of a Seattle real estate magnate. Nathan had gone to Ivy League schools, wore watches that cost more than Harold's truck, and spoke like every word was a business negotiation. The first dinner they shared was at a rooftop restaurant with a menu Harold didn't understand. Chloe ordered for him without asking. "Dad, try to fit in okay?" she whispered as Nathan's friends joined them. He laughed it off, but something inside him cracked that night. He noticed how Chloe changed her laugh softer, more practiced, how she rolled her eyes when he mentioned construction. When she posted engagement photos on social media, she didn't even tag him. Still, when the wedding plans began, she called him, not to invite, but to fund. Dad, the venue's in Lake Oswego. It's perfect, but it's expensive. Nathan's family is paying for some things, but we need help to make it respectable. Respectable. That word stuck in his mind like a nail through wood. By February, he had already paid deposits for the venue catering, floral arrangements, dress fittings, and photography. Over $150,000, all drawn from the same account he'd built over decades. The night before the wedding, Harold stood in his quiet house tying his best tie in the mirror. The reflection stared back, weathered skin, gray hair, hands scarred by years of work. He smiled sadly. "You clean up okay, old man?" He wrapped the small gift, a handcrafted music box he'd made himself with the same lullaby he used to hum when Chloe was little. The box alone had taken him 3 weeks to carve. Inside, he placed a note for the girl who once asked me to build her a castle and the man who promised to protect her. When he arrived at the venue, everything gleamed with the kind of money he'd never flaunted: imported orchids, crystal chandeliers, tuxedos tailored to perfection. He smiled through it all, even as he noticed the stares. Until that moment at the entrance when his daughter, the girl he'd built his world around, told him he didn't belong in it. The drive home was silent. Portland's skyline blurred through the windshield as his thoughts hardened like cement. 28 years of sacrifice erased in one public humiliation. He parked in front of his modest home, hands steady on the wheel. Then his phone buzzed. It was his lawyer, Margaret Reeves, following up on a property dispute he'd ignored for months. Her name stayed on the screen a moment longer than necessary. Something in Harold's mind clicked, a thought so clean and calm it almost frightened him. He didn't feel anger. He felt balance. He opened his banking app, scrolled through a list of pending transactions: venue catering, floral services, music. All linked to one name: Chloe Bennett. His thumb hovered over the call button for First Federal Bank Business Services. It was Saturday afternoon, plenty of time before banks closed. As he pressed call, the reflection in his phone showed a man he barely recognized, tired, older, but finally in control. The rain tapped gently against the windshield. As Harold sat in his truck outside the quiet bank building, the screen of his phone glowing in the dim afternoon light. He hadn't pressed confirm yet, not because he was uncertain, but because something inside him had shifted. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about money or schedules. He was thinking about her. Laura had died on a Wednesday. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and lilacs, Chloe's favorite flower. She was 3, too young to understand that her mother's soft hand would never brush her hair again. That night, Harold sat by her bed and promised, "Daddy's right here. I'll take care of everything." He meant it. He learned to braid hair from YouTube videos, burned pancakes on Saturday mornings, and built a treehouse in the backyard so she'd never feel small in a big world. He worked 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, building other people's dreams while saving every penny for hers. When she was 6, Chloe handed him a crayon drawing a stick figure family, just the two of them, standing beside a crooked house. "That's our castle," she said proudly. He kept that drawing pinned above his desk for 20 years. Elementary school was easy. She was bright, kind, grateful. She'd run to him after every recital, still wearing her glittery costume. "Did you see me, Daddy? I waved at you twice, and he always said the same thing. You were perfect sunshine." But something began to change around 13. Her classmates arrived in shiny cars with parents who smelled like perfume and success. Harold would show up in his dusty pickup wearing work boots. He noticed her glances, quick, embarrassed, guilty. One morning she asked softly, "Dad, could you drop me off 2 blocks before school?" He smiled, pretending not to notice the shame hiding in her eyes. "Sure, sweetheart. 2 blocks it is." He parked where she asked, watched her hurry away without looking back, and whispered to himself, "She'll understand one day." High school turned into a blur of expenses: tuition, uniforms, laptops, field trips. Every bill arrived with her name on it, and every payment was his silent act of devotion. Then came college, California sun beaches, and tuition bills that felt like mortgage payments. The first semester she called him twice a week, bubbling with stories about classes and new friends. By the second year, the calls became shorter. By the third, they were only about money. "Dad, can you transfer $3,000 for my study program in Italy's, Dad? I need $500 for the business fraternity trip. Dad, I'll pay you back after graduation." He'd smile at the phone. "Don't worry about it, honey. Just focus on your future." What he didn't say was that he was working weekends again, doing physical labor he hadn't done in 20 years to cover her networking expenses. When she graduated, Harold drove 16 hours straight to attend the ceremony. Chloe wore a designer gown under her cap and hugged him just long enough for the photographer to capture it. "Thanks, Dad. You're the best," she said already, glancing toward her friends. That was the last time she said thank you without asking for something afterward. The real distance began when Nathan appeared. She spoke differently. Her tone lighter, her laughter rehearsed. When she introduced Nathan to Harold, she said, "Dad owns a small business." A small business. Bennett Builders employed 60 people. It had built 3 public libraries and a veterans memorial. But in her world, small meant unimpressive. The last Christmas before the wedding, she gave him a bottle of cologne with a note for when you visit our side of town so you don't smell like construction. He had smiled then too, because fathers are good at hiding heartbreak. Now, sitting in that truck years later, he stared at the same hands that had held her through every fever-scraped knee and heartbreak. They looked old now, veins, raised nails, cracked skin lined with years of giving. For 25 years, those hands had built her dreams. Tonight, they would finally stop paying for them. The call to the bank lasted exactly 9 minutes. 9 minutes to undo 28 years of unconditional giving. First Federal Business Services, this is Patricia speaking. How may I assist you, Patricia? This is Harold Bennett. Account number 45319770. I need to stop all authorized transactions related to the Bennett Pierce wedding. There was a pause, the sound of distant typing. Sir, that includes multiple high-value transfers, venue catering florist, and several vendors. Are you certain? Harold looked through the windshield at the golden lights of the ballroom across the parking lot. Completely certain. He gave his verification details from memory. The banker's tone shifted to professional efficiency. All payments halted as of 3:42 p.m. Mr. Bennett, confirmation codes have been generated. Perfect, Harold said quietly. Thank you for your help. When the call ended, he stared at the reflection in his phone, a man whose face was lined by equal parts labor and loss. Then he opened his contact list. Marcus, Elegant Events Catering. The line connected after 2 rings. Mr. Bennett. The reception is going beautifully. The guests are loving the appetizers. There's been a change, Marcus. Payment authorization has been revoked. You'll want to collect your equipment immediately. Silence. Sir, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying the bank has canceled the contract. Secure your property before the main course. He ended the call before the caterer could respond. Next, Susan, Bloom and Vine Floral Studio. Susan, this is Harold Bennett regarding the Pierce wedding. Oh, Mr. Bennett. The arrangements are stunning. The orchids they're unpaid for. The authorization was canceled 20 minutes ago. You might want to retrieve your property. Susan stammered something about timing and reputation. Harold simply said, business is business. He continued down the list: photography string quartet, sound technician linen rentals, each call shorter than the last. By 4:15 p.m., every vendor connected to the event knew their payments were void. He leaned back in his seat, exhaled slowly, and whispered to himself, let the lesson begin. Inside the ballroom, champagne still flowed and laughter filled the air. The string quartet played a soft rendition of Clair de Lune. Chloe stood beside Nathan, radiant, greeting guests with the calm authority of someone who believed her life was perfect. The illusion didn't last long. Susan was the first to arrive, a petite woman in a black blazer flanked by 2 assistants carrying empty plastic bins. They entered through the side door, heads down. Professionalism hiding panic. Chloe noticed them immediately. Excuse me? She called, her smile still fixed in place. Can I help you? Susan approached the altar display and began carefully removing a row of orchids. Ma'am, I'm Susan from Bloom and Vine. Payment authorization for these arrangements was canceled 40 minutes ago. We're here to collect our property. That's ridiculous, Chloe said, laughter cracking in her throat. Everything's been paid for weeks ago. My father handled it. Susan paused, lowering her voice. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Bennett called personally to cancel. The words landed like a gunshot. Chloe blinked, her practiced composure shattering. What? No, that's not possible. Guests began whispering. A photographer hesitated mid-shot. The string quartet faltered, unsure whether to keep playing. Before Chloe could respond, the main doors opened again. Marcus entered, clipboard in hand, followed by 3 catering staff. Their polished smiles were gone. "Ma'am," Marcus said firmly, "we need to pause service. Payment was revoked at 4:15. Our legal policy requires immediate asset protection." Nathan stepped forward, his tuxedo immaculate, his face tightening. "You can't just stop in the middle of a reception." "I'm afraid we can," Marcus replied. "And we must." Around them, servers began covering buffet stations with white cloths. Guests glanced at one another, uneasy laughter echoing off marble. "Someone fix this," Chloe demanded, looking wildly between Nathan and Susan. "My father would never." But even as she spoke, another vendor entered, the audio technician unplugging equipment, coiling cables. The quartet's music died mid-note. "What is happening?" one guest whispered. Another muttered, "Is this part of the show?" Marcus turned to his team. "Pack everything carefully. Let's minimize damage." Susan's assistants moved swiftly, dismantling centerpieces, their latex gloves snapping as if sealing a crime scene. Nathan pulled out his phone, pacing furiously. "This is insane. I'll call the bank myself." He looked up, face flushed. "They said authorization came directly from you, Mr. Bennett. How the hell could he?" He stopped. The realization hit. He's teaching us a lesson. Chloe stood frozen, her hands trembling around her bouquet. "No, he wouldn't do this to me." Then the chandeliers flickered. The sound system shut down entirely. A single champagne flute slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the marble floor, echoing the moment Harold's had earlier. Outside, rain began to fall. Meanwhile, across the parking lot, Harold watched through the windshield as chaos rippled through the glittering hall. A catering truck pulled up beside the loading dock, and men began hauling crates back inside. He could imagine every second Chloe's confusion turning to anger, then panic. He didn't smile. He didn't feel triumph. He simply whispered, "You'll understand soon." The phone buzzed. "Chloe Bennett, incoming call." He let it ring once, twice, 5 times. Then it went to voicemail. Seconds later, another call, then another. He didn't answer any of them. By the 4th call, her voice filled the cabin, desperate, shrill, echoing through the speaker. "Dad, please, something's wrong. The vendors are leaving." The guests are staring. Nathan's furious. "Just call me back, please." He closed his eyes. The rain outside had become steady, rhythmic, a kind of mercy. "This isn't revenge," he told himself softly. "It's education." The 5th voicemail began differently. No panic, no screaming, just a long silence before her voice broke through, smaller, cracked. "Dad, please. I don't understand what's happening. People are laughing at us. Nathan's family is furious. Please call me back." Harold sat in the dark cab of his truck listening, every word stabbed where years of sacrifice used to live. He didn't reply. Not yet. By 5:00 p.m., the venue parking lot was a parade of retreat. Florist vans idled with hazard lights flashing, workers carrying away flowers that had barely bloomed. The catering truck followed, its logo half-faded under the rain. A man in a soaked tuxedo held a plate of half-eaten steak as he watched the chaos unfold inside. Through the wide glass windows, Harold saw Chloe standing at the center of the ballroom, her dress pristine amid the disarray, like a queen watching her empire crumble. Guests whispered behind manicured hands. Nathan gestured angrily to his phone, pacing. The string quartet had packed their instruments. The sound technician coiled his last cable and left. Even the chandelier lights dimmed, reflecting in the puddles that spread across the marble floor. Harold started the engine but didn't drive away. He waited until the last truck pulled out, leaving behind silence and humiliation. Only then did he whisper, "Now we're even." He arrived home 20 minutes later. The smell of sawdust and coffee greeted him like old friends. He took off his jacket, hung it neatly on the rack, and walked straight to his study. The room was lined with filing cabinets, decades of work tax forms, invoices, blueprints. In one corner stood a photo of Chloe at 8 years old, missing 2 front teeth, holding up a science fair ribbon. He paused there, thumb brushing over the glass. Then he sat at his desk and opened the first drawer, labeled Education. Inside were folders organized by year: elementary, middle school, high school, college. Each one held a story. He began writing them down, not as memories, but as transactions. Riverside Primary, 2003-2009. Tuition $8,000 per year. Maplewood Academy, 2009 to 2015 uniforms, $12,000 annually. California State University tuition $48,000 per year. Dorm housing $15,000. Study abroad $9,800. Spring trips $3,500. He entered each figure into a new spreadsheet. The total climbed relentlessly. 200,000, 300,000, 500,000. He kept going. The transportation folder contained 3 car purchases. The first a used Civic, the second a BMW 320i, the third a BMW X3 because Nathan's friends all drive SUVs. $18,000, $28,000, $45,000. He typed until the numbers blurred. By the time he finished, the screen glowed with a total $910,000. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes, exhaling through clenched teeth. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was record-keeping. He whispered to the empty room. I gave you the life you wanted, Chloe. Every dollar, every chance. Now you'll learn what it costs to forget. The next morning, he met Margaret Reeves at her downtown law office. She had been his attorney for years, pragmatic, sharp, compassionate only when necessary. Harold, she greeted, gesturing to the mountain of folders he carried. This looks serious. It is, he said, placing them on the polished oak table. I need formal documentation. Debt classification, repayment demand, everything airtight. Margaret flipped through the papers. You've kept meticulous records. Impressive, really. But Harold, this isn't a business dispute. It's your daughter. I know, he replied quietly. That's why it's taken me 28 years to treat it like one. She sighed. If we proceed, it becomes a legal matter. Recovery notice, 30-day deadline, official service by courier. Are you ready for that kind of fallout? He looked her straight in the eye. I've already had my fallout. Yesterday. By noon, the letter was finished, printed on official letterhead, its tone formal and absolute. Notice of debt recovery. $910,000 repayment required within 30 calendar days. Failure to respond may result in civil collection proceedings. Margaret slid the document across the table. Courier can deliver within the hour. Room number Lakeview Grand Hotel, room 614, signed delivery required. He signed his name with slow precision. When he left the office, the city streets felt different, cleaner, quieter. The weight on his chest had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. At exactly 2:45 p.m., his phone buzzed. A text from Margaret, delivery confirmed, signed by C. Bennett Pierce. He imagined the scene, the hotel concierge knocking politely, handing Chloe a legal envelope sealed in red. Inside the first page, bold and unmistakable, amount due, $910,000. He pictured her face, the disbelief, the dawning realization that her father wasn't bluffing, that every designer shoe and vacation had been recorded, accounted for, and now reclaimed. At the hotel, Chloe's hands shook as she opened the letter. Nathan stood behind her, reading over her shoulder. His expression hardened. What is this? He demanded. She could barely speak. It's from my father. He snatched the paper and skimmed it aloud. Debt recovery. $900,000. Has he lost his mind? Her knees gave way. She sank onto the bed, whispering, he kept records. All these years. Nathan paced, phone already in hand. We'll get our lawyer on this. He can't sue family over... He stopped mid-sentence. The phone screen glowed. Incoming call, Dad. Chloe looked up, eyes wet, face pale. He's calling me. Nathan stared at her. Don't answer. But she did. Her thumb hovered over the green icon as tears spilled down her cheeks. And then click. The line connected. The letter lay on the hotel bed like a weapon. Its weight felt heavier than paper, more like judgment printed in ink. Chloe stared at the bold words one more time. Repayment required within 30 days. Her phone buzzed again. The name flashing on the screen made her stomach twist. Dad. For a moment she thought about letting it ring, but her thumb moved on its own. Dad. Her voice cracked. Chloe. His tone was calm, almost businesslike. I assume you've received the document. What is this? Some kind of joke? No, it's an audit. An audit? She repeated, disbelief sharp in her voice. You're treating me like a client who owes you money. I'm treating you like an adult who needs to understand consequences. Her breath hitched. $900,000, I can't pay that. You can't, I can. Harold interrupted his tone level. Every transaction has a record. For 28 years you lived on generosity without gratitude. That ends now. Chloe's chest tightened. You're my father. I was, he said softly, until you decided I wasn't part of your family. The line went silent except for the sound of her breath. 30 days, he continued. Use them wisely. The call ended before she could speak again. For several seconds, the only sound was the rain against the window. Then Nathan's voice cut through the air. This is insane. He was pacing near the minibar, holding the letter like it was radioactive. He's completely lost it. Do you know what this looks like? My family's going to think I married into a circus. Chloe tried to speak, but her throat tightened. He didn't mean, oh, he meant every word. Nathan snapped. And now every newspaper in Portland's going to hear that your father is suing you for your wedding expenses. I can't stay in this mess. Wait, what? She stood up, clutching his arm. You're not serious. I'm completely serious. My reputation is at stake. He pulled away, his tuxedo jacket already in his hand. You fix this, then we'll talk. He slammed the door behind him, leaving her alone with the echo. She tried calling friends. One didn't answer. Another sent her to voicemail. Her college roommate texted back hours later. Sorry, Chloe, I don't want to get involved. Even her maid of honor blocked her. By nightfall, the only light in the room came from her phone screen, a single notification from an online article. Local businessman publishes records of $910,000 in lifetime support for estranged daughter. Chloe clicked. Her father's name filled the headline, Harold Bennett. A father's financial reckoning. There were photos, scanned receipts, tuition bills, old car payments, even a note she had written at age 8 taped beside them. Thank you, Daddy, for building my treehouse. The comments were merciless. He did everything for her. Ungrateful brat. She deserved that lesson. Chloe dropped the phone onto the carpet, her hands shaking. The noise outside felt far away. For the first time in her life, she wasn't angry. She was ashamed. Memories began to return like waves, one after another. Her father sitting cross-legged on the floor, wrapping Christmas presents he could barely afford. The smell of sawdust and paint on his clothes when he hugged her after work. His calloused hands holding her bike steady the day she learned to ride. Don't let go, Daddy, I won't, sweetheart. He always kept that promise until she told him to leave her wedding. Her chest ached as she looked around the silent room. The white dress draped over the chair looked like a ghost, now a monument to pride and emptiness. She walked to the bathroom mirror and wiped at her smeared mascara. Her reflection didn't look like the girl she remembered. You thought love meant luxury, she whispered to the woman in the mirror. You thought his sacrifices were your entitlement. She pressed her palms against the sink. You traded the only honest love you ever had for approval from people who never cared. Tears blurred her vision again, but this time they weren't for pity, they were for clarity. She opened her laptop and searched his name again. There was a new interview. Harold Bennett, calm and composed in a dark suit, speaking to a local reporter. This isn't about revenge, he said. It's about accountability. Love without gratitude turns into debt. I'm just collecting what's been due for a long time. The clip ended. Chloe sat motionless for a long time before whispering, You're right, Dad. She opened a notebook from her purse, one of the few things she still had from college. Between doodles and half-written notes, she began to write. Dear Dad, I don't know how to undo the years I wasted taking you for granted. I can't repay the money, not yet, but I want to repay the debt of respect. Tell me how to start. She closed the notebook and placed it on the nightstand beside the folded letter. The next morning she woke to another wave of messages, not sympathy but silence. Nathan hadn't returned. Her phone showed no missed calls except one, Dad 8:02 a.m. Just a text followed, then start with honesty. That afternoon, she walked out of the hotel for the first time since the wedding. The sky above Portland was gray but open. She stood there in her sneakers and yesterday's dress, watching rainwater run along the curb. For once, she didn't feel like the center of a story, just a girl trying to find her way back to being someone's daughter. She took a deep breath and whispered, I will. Then she turned toward the city, ready to face the life she had never truly lived. Have you ever realized love only after losing it? Comment, I have. If this story reminds you of someone you took for granted. A week passed before Chloe finally stopped counting the days. The hotel room was long gone, along with the silk gowns and catered meals. She now rented a single room in an old brick building that smelled faintly of rain and detergent. The mattress sagged, the faucet leaked, and the walls carried every noise from the neighbors. But it was hers, paid for with her own hands. Each morning she reread the last message from her father. Then start with honesty. At first she didn't understand what it meant, but the more she sat in silence, the clearer it became. Honesty wasn't about apologizing, it was about doing. So she began. The first few days were a blur of rejection. She walked into boutiques, offices, diners, smiling awkwardly, clutching a hastily printed resume. Every manager looked at her manicured nails, her lack of experience, her wedding ring still shining despite everything. "I'm sorry, miss. We're not hiring right now." By the fourth day, her savings had dwindled to $23 and some coins. Then she saw the sign taped to a cafe window, "Help wanted front counter, part-time." The place was small Riverside Brew, a corner shop that smelled of espresso and cinnamon. The owner, a woman in her 50s with silver hair tied back, glanced at Chloe's trembling hands. "Ever worked in service before?" "No," Chloe admitted. "But I'm willing to learn. I really need this job." The woman studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "You start tomorrow. Aprons in the back." The next morning, Chloe slipped into the cafe before sunrise. The first pot of coffee hissed to life as she fumbled with cups and napkins. She burned her hand twice, spilled sugar once, and nearly dropped a tray in front of a customer, but she stayed. By the third day, she could remember regulars' orders. "Double latte, extra foam," she'd say with a smile, and they'd nod in surprise. She liked the sound of the cash register, her register ringing for the first time in her life. At closing, she swept the floors while the owner counted the till. "How's it feel to earn your first paycheck?" the woman asked. Chloe wiped her forehead and smiled, like breathing after holding it for years. That night, she sat on her bed and wrote in her notebook, "For the first time, I earned something instead of being given it." She stared at the words until they blurred with tears. A week later, just before closing, the bell above the cafe door chimed. She turned and froze. Her father stood in the doorway, rain still clinging to his shoulders, his old denim shirt damp at the sleeves. In his hand was a small, worn envelope. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then Chloe swallowed and found her voice. "Would you like to sit down, sir?" A faint smile tugged at Harold's lips. "You finally learned how to say that." He took a seat by the window. The smell of coffee filled the pause between them. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said quietly. "I didn't expect to find you working," he replied. His tone wasn't cruel, just surprised, almost proud. "You doing okay? I'm trying." She looked down at her apron stained with milk foam and coffee grounds. "It's not much, but it's honest. That's more than you had before," he said. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the espresso machine filling the gaps that years of distance had carved. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry," Chloe began softly. "Not because I want something, but because I finally understand what I did. You gave me everything, and I made you feel small for it. You didn't deserve that." Harold looked at her, really looked, and saw his little girl beneath the exhaustion. "You know," he said after a moment, "your mother used to love this cafe. We'd come here every Sunday before you were born." She said the cinnamon rolls tasted like forgiveness. Chloe's eyes filled again. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Maybe not," he said gently. "But you do deserve a chance to earn it." He slid the small envelope across the table. "Here." She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was an old yellowed receipt dated more than 2 decades earlier. "Riverside preschool tuition payment, $320, paid in full." Her hands shook. "What is this?" "The first bill I ever paid for you," Harold said. "Your education began there. Maybe it's time you finish it your way." Tears spilled before she could stop them. "Dad, I don't know if I can ever make up for what I did." "You can't," he said plainly. "But you can move forward." He stood, slipping on his jacket. "You keep that receipt. Think of it as lesson 1. As he turned to leave, Chloe called out, voice trembling, "Do you think you could ever respect me again?" He stopped at the door. glanced back with the faintest smile. "I've always loved you, Chloe. Now I just want to see if I can trust you." Then he was gone, stepping into the soft drizzle outside. Chloe sat for a long time staring at the slip of paper in her hand. Below the faded "paid in full," her father had written a new line in blue ink. Lesson 1 complete. The words blurred as tears hit the page. She whispered to herself, "Then I'll keep learning, Dad." When the next customer entered, she wiped her eyes, tied her apron tighter, and went back to work. The evening sun filtered through the cafe window, warm and forgiving, as Chloe carried a cup of coffee to the counter, one steady step at a time. The cafe had emptied by sunset. Only the low hum of the refrigerator and the smell of roasted beans remained. Chloe wiped the last table, humming softly the same lullaby her father used to hum when she was little. As she turned toward the counter, she noticed something resting beside the tip jar, a small wooden music box. It was carved from walnut, polished but worn at the edges. A note was taped to the lid in her father's handwriting. "For the girl who once asked me to build her a castle, you're finally laying the first brick." Her breath caught. She opened the lid, and the gentle melody of "You Are My Sunshine" filled the empty cafe, the same tune he had played on the night her mother died. She sank into a chair, listening as tears ran freely down her cheeks. Each note echoed against the walls like forgiveness. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets of Portland glowed under the golden haze of streetlights. Chloe glanced at the receipt pinned inside her apron pocket, the one that read "Lesson 1 complete." She took out her notebook and wrote beneath it, "Lesson 2, earn his trust." She closed the notebook, wiped her face, and whispered toward the door, "See you soon, Dad." The lights flickered softly as the music box wound down, its last note hanging in the air. Fragile, unfinished, hopeful. Tagline, "Voices fade, but guilt echoes louder." If this story touched something in you, maybe a memory, maybe a regret, know that you're not alone. Take a second to share it so someone else can feel understood too. Thank you for watching.